Good afternoon. I'm sorry we were having some technical glitch at our end. Uh, uh, so let me just introduce the topic and the panelists. First of all, this webinar is brought to you by EBC Learning, and I'm Dr. Charu Mathur. And today with us we have Mr. Saket Mishra. He will be telling us. He will be in fact decoding the stimulus package which has been declared by the union government and with a special focus on MSMEs. Now, just to tell you better about Mr. Mishra, Mr. Saket Mishra is CEO of, yeah, just a minute. Hello, there is a problem. Mr. Saket Mishra, he is the CEO of Venus India, Finance and Special Advisor to the Purvanchal Vikas Board. Welcome, Mr. Mishra.
Thanks, Charu.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Saket Mishra, he has been banker with 25 years of experience covering financing, investing, transactional services and advisory. Across capital raising and advisory transaction with his client, he works on the deals aggregating to more than 75 billion USD. He holds leadership position in banking and APAC region. He has built and again rebuilt businesses, especially in the commercial and the corporate banking space. He worked on all the aspects of the financing, including infrastructure, funding, equity, debt, capital market, and corporate finance and private banking. He graduated from the St. Stephen College, Delhi, and he did his MBA from IIM Calcutta. He did his business course from the Harvard as well as from London School of Business. He is deeply involved with the UP government and is advisor to the Purvanchal Vikas Board. Welcome, sir. And now, before I just start with the webinar and hand over mic to the sir, I would just like to tell you a bit about our website, about our platform, EBC Learning. We have been developing many courses, and I will be taking you to the tour of our the platform at the end of this webinar. And this webinar, you can check. The recordings will be available on the various live platform. And now over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathur. I'll try my best to keep everybody awake. And as far as my experience goes, all I can say is just means that I've been working for way too long and I wish I could retire. But onward onto the presentation. What I'll do is I'll share my screen and then I'll switch my video off so we can save some bandwidth on this. So hang on a second. Okay, can everybody see this now?
Yeah.
Okay. So as Dr. Mathur mentioned, the topic is decoding the stimulus package. And on the screen, I won't take much longer, but I mean, there are two things that are on top, which I think which I'll talk about throughout this webinar. The one on the left is the choice that every government today faces, which is between controlling the contagion and between letting the economy shut down. And I think that's immensely important for a poor country like India. The second is crystal gazing, and I think the main point that I'm making there is that this is an unforeseen event. So when we are all talking about we should do this, we should do that, the fact is there is pretty much close to zero past data that can determine what we are supposed to do in this situation, either on the medical side, but even more on the economic side. So just as a way of keeping everybody awake for a short while, imagine yourself being Honorable FM and the kind of situation that you're going to be facing if you had to put in place a stimulus package. I'm just going to give a bit of context in terms of what she was facing before she announced this. So if you look at it, the global economies are in a free fall. So I mean, the first thing that you'll notice is that advanced economies are going to fall by about 6%. Now that number is, this is the blue chart that's here. So I'll, this one right here. Second thing is that globally, there is massive amounts of debt that's happened. So all this red area, the slightly brighter red area, are all countries where more than 75% of the GDP debt consists equals to 75% or more of the GDP. This one is the other chart that I think which is pretty important, which all these brown areas, the dark brown areas, are areas that are going to see negative growth in their GDPs this year. So what we are looking at is a global economy that's effectively in shutdown mode. I mean, this chart here, again, just shows you what the steep fall is like. So this is the background which Nirmala ji faced while announcing the package. What's the situation like? So 190 countries, almost 6 million people have actually got the virus. We're talking about $77 billion of GDP lost globally. And I think that number is increasing by the day. More important for us is that 50 million people, now that's a large number, 50 million people will be pushed into poverty this year. Just to put this into perspective, this means that all the poverty reduction that's happened globally since 2015 is going to get wiped out. And we are going to be back, literally the poverty clock is going to be going back in time. For us or for the FM, as you guys are, the COVID shock has basically doubled up on what was already a very slowing economy where our fiscal deficit was already going up. Foreign investors have been withdrawing money from emerging market Asia. 16 billion has gone out of India. We've already talked about leveraged, how leveraged the world is. And I mean, that has implications because leverage, over leverage in a time of falling ability to repay leads to defaults. Millions of migrant workers are wanting to go home. I mean, there is a sudden stoppage of work, which meant that for 10 days, 15 days, 30 days, maybe people could stay in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, or the Tamil migrant workers who were staying in Kerala. But after that, basically their employers would normally tell them, guess what? There is nothing left for you to do here and you need to go back or find your own way. And that's led to a crisis of its own when we talk about India. Financial sector meltdown risk. I mean, globally it's starting. I think in India we've handled it quite well, but again, it's something that the FM needed to keep in mind. And finally, of course, the lockdown economy. Major areas of impact, I won't talk about all of them, but I think for me, there are three things that are really, really important here. One is aggregate demand. At every level, because of this crisis, demand has fallen. And once demand falls, it doesn't matter how much working capital people have or what the capacity is. The fact is people will not produce. When they don't produce, people will not be employed, and it's a vicious cycle. For the first time in India, we are facing deflationary pressure. Second is financial markets. If you go back in time and look at the, let's say, the global financial crisis, those were all paper crises, right? So there was too much lending on assets that possibly had inflated values. This is a chance for reverse contagion. So effectively, the economy is shut down, but because we are worldwide in an over-leveraged situation, at a personal level, people lose employment, therefore they can't pay back their loans. Company level, revenue stopped, and therefore they can't, and profit stops, they can't repay their loans. And at the country level, suddenly you'll see countries where the tax revenues have dropped, where economic activity has dropped, yet they have to spend much more to cope with the crisis. On all three fronts, we are staring at defaults. Now, those defaults translate into only one thing, which is financial markets effectively either freezing up or melting down, whichever way you'd like to sort of describe it. And one other thing, which is just this point and which is more sort of contextual, is dissatisfaction with the way the post-World War II status quo was. Post-World War II, there was Bretton Woods and everybody had the, whether it was a WTO or CAT in its earlier form, there was a particular way in which the world was set up. I think with this crisis, a lot of the dissatisfaction in terms of income equality within countries, between countries, and access of opportunity is going to blow up. And I think that's going to cause a lot of change in multiple societies. So that was the good news. I mean, literally, those were just numbers and things that we could control. The real risk in this crisis that again, taking that theme of you all as the finance minister goes, is that there is no past precedent for a crisis like this. Never in the world, not in the Great Depression in the 1930s and 40s, not in the global financial crisis, not in the Asian crisis. Never has the world economy shut down at the pace at which it has shut down today. So effectively in about 45 days, I mean, if you look back, March 1st, and the next 45 days, or maybe last week of Feb, if you want to include that, till today, the world business has effectively shut down by about 60 to 70%. That has never happened at this speed. As I mentioned, it's uncharted territory. And then there are massive amounts of uncertainty at both our individual level, at the country level, and at the corporate level on what's going to happen. Now you combine the fact that essentially one is operating in a sort of black hole kind of atmospheric with the fear that going out, one is going to fall ill, with the fear that the next thing that we touch, as happened in New York City, may cause infection, with the fear of asymptomatic people, carrying germs for the next 1 year. So what does this lead to? It leads to massive volatility because of freezing up of the markets and economies. So in a sense, we want to buy something, we want to sell something, because both supply side and demand side are frozen, there are massive fluctuations in values. So I've just given examples of some of the things that I think are uncertain. How long will it last? Why are all the graphs wrong? I mean, in India, we were supposed to, there was one famous graph that said that May 16th, we were going to have 0 people infected. Guess what? That's not true. Everybody who's been through a statistical course has brought up their own graph. All of them are effectively wrong because the virus itself is dynamic and is, to some extent, it's mutating based on local conditions. Look at the uncertainty around trade. I mean, we talked about 12% earlier that the IMF has projected, but the range in which global trade is likely to fall this year is all the way from 12 or 13% to 32%. Imagine global trade falling by 32%. But even bigger risk is, imagine people and policymakers trying to make a policy with a 20% gap in where trade is going to be. So, that's the kind of atmosphere in which the FM needed to actually get a stimulus package going. Just to sort of wake you all up, I thought I would add a picture. Now, in essence, what I'm saying is, if you'd all remember the story of the 6 blind men who were trying to describe an elephant, it's pretty much the same story. The crisis is so complex, so dynamic, and the size is so big that it becomes very impossible, almost impossible to pinpoint 1 or 2 issues. Normally, if there was just an issue of liquidity, as happened in global financial crisis, the banks would print money, liquidity would come in, inflation would happen, and the crisis over time would resolve. Right now, there are multiple factors. Think of it. Do you want to start the economy? Do you not want to start the economy? Do we start trains? By the time trains get started and take migrants back, how do we get migrants back to the places that they work on? Because guess what? Harvesting had to start, and therefore there were not enough people who were working. So I just thought this is an interesting sort of illustration from our past of what the challenge is for us. Again, I think governments are already responding. I mean, some of you may have seen the chart in one of my previous presentations. In effect, we started off, I think, March 20th. The G20 talked about $5 trillion of stimulus. I reckon the G20 is closer to 12 or 13 trillion dollars in real stimulus through spending or deferrals, etc. And I think everybody's pretty much realized there's a false trade-off between health and getting the economy going. I mean, the economy cannot, in essence, start until there is a control over the contagion. So what was the FM's challenge when she had to get the stimulus package announced? We needed money to meet the medical challenge. As I mentioned, there were lots of the weakest, perhaps 15 to 20% of the population that suddenly lost their jobs and that needed money to survive, to get home, to get their families food. There was obviously the need to get the economy restarted, whether it was in 10%, 15%, 20%, and live with that limited economy for at least 6 months. Because clearly, I mean, the honest truth is, until we get a vaccine in place, I don't see many of us, I mean, despite the sort of excitement people are showing, at least in Delhi, about going out for chaat as soon as lockdown ends, I don't see people going out to restaurants or tourism taking off until there is a vaccine. So we're talking about at least another 6 months, 8 months of a very limited economy. We needed to create jobs. And again, one of the Harvard professors had talked about saving jobs as being the best way to create employment. So clearly, one of the things that the FM had to do was to make it easier for corporates that had no revenues coming in for the last 3 months, would have limited revenues coming in for the next 3 months, to not fire staff. Then you would have seen, if any of you watch CNBC, every day there is some association or the other, of some industry or the other, that wants a lifeline. And I mean, clearly the story is that without a lifeline being given, that industry will fail, and that industry is supposedly the most important in the world. So, and then there was fiscal prudence. Everybody, we are still, despite the fact that we have seen in that previous chart that all the global economies of the world are all talking about 10% plus fiscal deficit in terms of spending. We as a governance mechanism have become a bit wedded to this whole fiscal deficit targeting, and we need to obviously clearly take a call on whether or not it matters at this stage, and whether, my personal view is it doesn't matter at all. It's completely irrelevant, but I mean, that's just my personal view. And last but not least, I think the biggest issue, as I mentioned, was deflation. It doesn't matter what else we do until we resurrect demand. Demand requires people to feel safe, people to have money in their pocket. And I think that, to my mind, was the single biggest objective of the stimulus. I've put in, again, I mean, I put in two little blurbs in between. One is that same choice that I talked about earlier. The heart is the health issue, and I guess the wallet, the piggy bank is the money issue. And the other person balancing between the two cliffs is essentially the challenge that the FM faces in terms of maintaining fiscal prudence, and sort of not putting the future generations at risk while providing a policy. And obviously we are all looking for a V-shaped curve. Clearly, the indications are that we are not going to get a V-shaped curve even when the economy opens, just because the vaccine is not going to be there. So if you ask me personally, given all these challenges that the FM faced, I would be quite happy to let her do the stimulus package rather than stay on in that job. So let's look at what she actually provided. So the theme was obviously the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, and she presented this in 5 parts. I have broken this up into 3 broad themes, which I think reflect to some extent what is required in a situation like today's. First is to save lives and make sure that people have food to eat. The second is to build up, to start gradually letting the economy run. And the third is to build up either through changes to the economy, to the economic ecosystem, or through investments, some sort of ring fencing and protection against future shocks. So, the first 2 days she talked about, first day she talked about MSME, which I'll come to later. But I think if you look at it, the first thing and most important thing she's done is that migrants all over the country are going to get food effectively for the next 3 months. And there's going to be mobility of the ration card, which hadn't happened till now. There is a significant amount of money that was announced prior to the Atmanirbhar package. So people have got DBT payments throughout, and obviously the Manrega liberalization, both in terms of the money that is being spent, but also in terms of the fact that now, at least for a short while, no assets needed to be created. I think in effect, what that's doing is it's providing the rural economy. I mean, this combined with the agri-rural areas, the credit being provided to those areas, in a sense, is providing help to rural areas. And then there are the people who have actually lost their jobs. So street vendors, tribals whose living has been hindered. So in a sense, I've called it saving lives, because what do these packages do? They provide in effect a welfare parachute for all those who have lost their livelihood over the last 3 months, 4 months, and covering some of those who are continuing to lose livelihood as things go far. Second thing it does is, and I think the FM has done a good job of this, perhaps not enough people have figured this out, is that when we are talking about literally millions of people, I mean, I work in three three poorer districts of Eastern Uttar Pradesh. And those three districts have got about 175,000 people in the last 10 days. So build that up over Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, UP, Bihar, Orissa, and in the south into Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. And we're talking about millions of people who are suddenly going to return to their villages. Our villages normally already have relatively small land holdings. There isn't a lot of money that's extra there. And therefore, what the FM has done is provided some amount of money and some amount of support whereby either these workers can find jobs back home or at least get money back home to get food, and the rural economy gets credit so that they can perhaps increase their income over this period to get over it. So again, if you could recall, we talked about uncertainty, uncharted territory, and fear. And I think this reduces the fear and uncertainty because to some extent, everybody who's getting the money and who's lost the job at least is now confident that going forward, there is money to be had for them to meet their basic requirements. Second part is what we had promised to focus a little bit on, which is the MSMEs. And these are important because the MSMEs actually provide the largest amount of employment in the country. And we're not talking about just, the ancillary industries to Maruti or, but we're talking about, small workshops. We're talking about small mold shops that are, preparing aluminum mold or plastic molds for various household things. There are thousands and thousands of these companies that require funding because for the last 3 months, they haven't had any, they haven't been able to access their factories. Sales have been down to zero effectively. They've not been able to collect the payments because in many cases, the people who had to pay them didn't. So therefore, they were staring effectively. And I think Mohandas Pai talked about, I think it was him. I think he talked about at least 10 to 15% MSMEs effectively disappearing if they did not get the liquidity to tide them over. So I think this provides help on two sides. One is that it through this collateral-free loan, through the subordinated loan, and through the equity sort of quasi-equity infusion through the fund. What it allows MSMEs to do is that on day zero, when they suddenly go back to their factory, they can continue to pay their workers. They can actually buy the, in this circumstance, all the raw materials will have to be paid for in cash. There is likely to be no credit. They can actually buy this inventory, raw material, and they can start production and build up inventory, which itself should then obviously start up a positive cycle whereby gradually as people get paid, they go and buy stuff, etc. So I think the first thing it does, it allows money and liquidity to ignite the restart of their businesses. The second thing is that as these MSMEs start, any of us who have run our own businesses or actually, pretty much do any economic activity, we do it for profits. Even charities at the end of the day, their profit is just differently defined. So what the government has tried to do is to effectively improve the chances of these MSMEs being profitable and therefore providing some degree of attractiveness and inducement to the owners to actually start work as soon as possible. So the no global tenders for 200 crores, that opens up a huge market in terms of government orders. EPF means that in essence, the companies have to pay less for each employee, and hopefully that translates into them keeping some of their workers on the job. Marketing assistance, again, a lot of people who go to trade fairs to again do the small sales. I think some of that help is going to be immensely necessary, assuming it can get done. And the TDS and refunds and payment of government dues, I think, are pretty obvious. In essence, it helps these companies to actually reduce their borrowings again and hopefully improve profitability. Catalyst, I work for an NBFC, and 100% of our clients are MSMEs. And one of the constraints that we have faced in our country, and this was much before COVID-19, has been that MSMEs have not been able to get adequate funding from from their banks, because the banks over the past I guess 3-4 years, as they've been cleaning up their balance sheet, there has been a degree of credit of risk averseness that has come in, and I think the NBFCs have filled that gap to a large extent. So but again, if you take a step back, most NBFCs and a lot of the housing finance companies were all sitting on assets which were sort of 3 years to 10 years, depending on the asset class. And they were funding themselves with short term money, which was obviously a recipe for disaster. So I think the mutual funds, for instance, we had something like 6 lakh crores of mutual fund funding going into NBFCs and housing finance companies. Now, if you think of you and I, when we started panicking when COVID hit, the first thing we did was let's avoid any losses, take the money out of the mutual funds if we have invested. Doesn't matter if it's liquid fund or whatever else. Take the money out and effectively put it in the bank account. So therefore, the mutual funds would obviously face huge pressures, which would then lead to them calling defaults on onward lending, or effectively a massive chunk of the 6 lakh crores that was pending and that was financing our NBFCs and housing finance companies to not get refi. So I think what the government has done is to actually provide uh, huge credit lines. And I mean, if again this gets done properly between the TLTRO2 and other facilities, these are huge lines that are available that allows NBFCs to actually manage their asset liabilities. And once they have certainty of funding, they can actually go on and actually continue to lend so that the restart actually happens well. So in essence, what's happened with the MSMEs so far is that they've hopefully now been given assurance that their working capital requirements, whether it is in terms of increased bank current lending or through NBFCs, is possible. To the extent possible, they have been allowed to focus on their business, so compliance risk has been reduced, and they've been given more opportunities to do business. So overall, what this package does is it makes it improves the probability of MSMEs staying alive and coming through this crisis, and I think that's immensely important for a country like us. The third sort of broad subsegment that I've talked about is moving forward. And this was, again, I mean, I've mixed and matched effectively from the third, fourth, and fifth announcement of Honorable Finance Minister. And, we've seen liberalization of a lot of the coal and minerals. We have seen defense production. So a lot of sectors have been allowed private sector to come in, and the government has announced its own investments into health and technology driven education, plus a couple of areas. So what does this really do? I mean, this is the third stage which I talked about earlier, which is making sure that we are putting in place an ecosystem that actually helps protect ourselves from another shock. I think these are actually the biggest reforms since 1991, and they're long overdue. I mean, I wish we had them in the first government 2014, but at least we're getting them now. It allows private sector to have a real role in the economy. Our mineral resources can be used more efficiently, and it gives a fillip to a lot of technology-based entrepreneurs. So, in effect, for the first time, I think, and I've used this word, Atmanirbharta mein sajidari. So, the private sector actually becomes a real partner for the growth of the economy going forward, because clearly, again, if you go back to my first chart where we talk about fiscal deficits going up and the government needing to balance how much they spend with the need to ensure that our kids and our grandkids do not face a huge burden, it's important for the private sector to therefore come in. My last couple of slides will be just an analysis of whether they work or not and what my thoughts are. Is it enough to get the economy started? I think there is a lot that's been done. My only sort of caveat is that, and this I learned in my early years in banking, when we were advising clients who came into India. India is not a country for half measures. So if you want to do something, I think there is a need to have a critical scale of action that needs to be taken to succeed. And I think, to my mind, and perhaps it's because the government has not finished all that they will be doing, I do think there is need for perhaps a greater direct fiscal activity to be undertaken by the government. But otherwise, I think it is at least, I think, especially the reforms, which I think in the long run are going to be remembered as the second 1991. Second and third points, to my mind, are again quite important. Execution. I mean, I've repeated the words. It's not because I can't stop typing, but I think that the challenge is execution, because if you go back in time to 2014, or you go back in time to some of the other crises, simplicity of schemes is, to my mind, immensely important again in India, because you've got people who are sitting in villages, we've got small NBFCs, we've got small MSMEs. Overly complicated schemes, I think, make execution difficult. And to some extent, I think it will take time for some of these schemes to percolate to the ground level because of this transmission issue with complexity. So to my mind, the success or failure of this entire stimulus package depends on execution. If we get it right, we get it right. Otherwise, we are in serious trouble. Demand just goes back to what I said earlier. I think there is a need for greater investment, whether it is into infrastructure or whether it is through actual cash transfers, the helicopter dropping of cash into people's accounts that is needed to resurrect demand. So far, I think we focused a little bit, focused a bit more on supply. I think demand needs to be focused on. I'll talk briefly about vocal, about local, and capital and technology. Again, if you go back to that, to that chart of to that picture of the man balancing between two cliffs, I think this is a very, very fine line that we need to tread as a country. We need to protect and encourage our local entrepreneurs and our local businesses. But at the same time, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we as a country do not have either the capital or the technology to actually take us to a level that we deserve to be, which is top 3 or 5 in the world, and to drive out poverty. So I think we'll probably need to, again, it's part of execution. We need to have that fine balance between the two, because without foreign capital, we are not going to succeed. I mean, that I can say for sure. Center state role coordination. I mean, the only reason I put that in there is because as we execute these stimulus measures, the center effectively provides the scheme, but the food that has to be distributed, for instance, to the migrant workers has to be done at the state level. And I think there is, to some extent, the infrastructure of delivery at the state level is perhaps not as good as, or will need to be ramped up, because I don't think anybody has done the scale of delivery of welfare in the past. Banking and moral hazard is the other issue that I will briefly talk about. I think the one risk this entire package faces is that a lot of the credit delivery is through the banking channels. Now, the good side of that is that it means that the government's fiscal deficit does not go up. But in reality, what happens is that whether it's mudra loans or whether it's collateral-free credit, we are talking about some sort of risk of people believing that this is actually a handout and they never have to pay it back, which in turn will lead to our banks needing to recognize those losses, and the banks will then have to go to the government to get the guarantees. And I think just sort of it can effectively sort of have a negative impact on individual public sector banks' credit ratings if the sort of guarantee mechanism, etc., doesn't work well. Fifth L, level playing field. I think this for me is again immensely important, because every time there is a crisis in the world, or if there is a or if there is a situation where we limit imports or limit foreign capital, the challenge in reality is that it's the big boys who come and eat up all the small boys. Maybe not boys, but big dogs, small dogs, whatever you want to use. And I think we need to ensure that this, whether it's competition commission or, as I've put in, other regulatory regimes, people who control mining, people who control how private sector operates in atomic energy or space science, the regulatory regime and competition protection for me will be immensely important. Otherwise, we are just going to see a massive, massive jump in inequality of wealth. Last point I'll talk about is just data. It's for those who've ever heard me before, I'm sort of fixated on that. I, for the life of me, can't figure out why we still haven't got a law that says that our data should be used by us. Because every day, Google, Amazon, Alibaba, whoever, they're all using our data. They're all creating artificial intelligence-based apps. They're all creating modern applications, which we will have to pay for. I mean, if you go back, I call it the colonial pattern of trade being reproduced. In the old days, we sent cotton to the UK and it came back as textiles and we paid 3 times the price. It's exactly the same thing that will happen if we continue to allow data to be leaked from, not leaked, but to be freely used without deriving any value from it. So so those are some of my thoughts. In summation, I actually think it's a good package. I do think there will be follow-on steps because whatever little I've seen of this government, I think it's a dynamic government that responds. But I do think there needs to be attention to demand. I think that's going to be demand and execution. To my mind, are the two big words out of this page. So we talked about the bad news with these things. I'll just end with the good news. Now, if you look at it, we talked about fear, and gradually, as we are showing, I mean, if you see this graph is from today on CNBC. The rise in recoveries is now higher than the increase in active cases. So therefore, people are now not living in fear that if I get COVID, I'm 100% going to die. I think there's belief in our medical infrastructure. We've obviously been under heavy pressure in Mumbai and Delhi, but I think broadly the number of beds that have been assigned to COVID have kept pace so far. Contagion in the conventional areas has been slowed. I think the big risk there is rural spread, but I think overall the naked fear that we had that COVID is basically going to kill everybody, I think that's disappearing, and that allows the economy to open. Uncertainty and unmeasured. Again, with better testing, I think we have more data. We have more medicines that appear to be palliative, at least in terms of helping people recover. And therefore, I think everybody believes that we have the ability to manage through it. And that's very important because that essentially allows workers to go back to factories. It allows businessmen to actually start their businesses. It allows gradually people to get into public transport, etc., etc. So that's my concluding slide. I think I have hope at the moment. I think the volatility in freezing up is going to ease a little bit. We do have a long way ahead. I think the next 6 months are going to be difficult. But in short, I think the stimulus has done a fair amount to at least ease the process of the economy restarting. I think they've done reforms that will be remembered for the next 20, 30 years. But there remains demand to be reignited. And there remains the execution risk on the stimulus package, which, fingers crossed, hopefully will work well. That's my presentation, Dr. Mathur. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mishra. That was so informative and so full of knowledge. And as you have rightly said, that since 1991, reforms were overdue. And to me, the agricultural reforms are the greatest one. I think they are going to help the economy in the coming years to come. I think the ease in the Essential Commodities Act is one more thing which I think is going to help us in a long term. And one small thing while I was going through the stimulus package was found that they are going to pay some 10,000 rupees for restocking to the small vendors. So I think that is going to take care of the smallest guy. And as you have rightly said, because I have been taking notes while you were through your lectures, and as you have rightly said that India is very good at planning, but it is the execution which will merit the outcome of the stimulus package, and otherwise it will just remain a handout, and that will not going to take us as a nation anywhere. And finally, I think the definition of MSME that they have changed, the government has changed. I look at it as a big plus, even from a point of view of a lawyer, because that will help the business grow a little bigger. Otherwise, they are always trying to remain as small to get the benefits.
Thank you. Dr. Madhav, I saw two questions. I mean, if you like, I can answer them. One was, I think, about the IBC
Yeah,
being. So,
yeah.
there was one question about IBC. Look, IBC is one of the most important path-breaking sort of legislations we have passed. But the fact is that in this crisis, uh, all that has been effectively suspended are COVID caused IBC movements. And I think that for the moment, the requirement of ensuring employment, of ensuring that companies somehow remain afloat and have a bit of breathing space. I mean, if they are fundamentally poor businesses, or if they are businesses that where people have stolen, I think they will eventually go bankrupt in any case. But I'm highly supportive of the suspension of the IBC. There was a second question, I think, from KV about uh, support for companies that are restructuring or that don't have capital. Look, I mean, if the fund actually operates well, the fund that's been announced effectively, that and the collateral-free loans, I think should actually go a long way towards helping a lot of these guys. Again, my worry is that in execution, when we actually go to give out these loans, uh, banks may still not be in the right frame of mind to actually give it. Uh, and I think that somehow or the other we need to manage, because uh, if that doesn't happen, then I think the point that KV has made in his question is absolutely correct. It's not going to help people restart. I think there was a follow-on question just about IBC, that it's about restructuring and not recovery. I hope I got it right. Look, I mean, IBC is about restructuring, but IBC is not a process that works in isolation, right? So you can have a fabulous restructuring system and have 90% of the company of the world, of the country's MSME in restructuring. And I don't think that that actually either serves the purpose of real restructuring or resolution, nor does it help the economy. I mean, it's the same story with the fiscal deficit, right? People are still saying that we should stay at 6%, 7%, 8% fiscal deficit. It's like the example is today's date, and I'm fat, but if there is no point me going on a diet that kills me. And I think a fiscal deficit where we are not spending enough to get the economy running is going to kill the economy. It's almost irrelevant. If we come back, we have massive. I mean, we've got a demographic dividend that is possible to execute. If we have a strong economy, people will always invest and we can recover. But if demand doesn't recover, if we do not get the economy running again through government spending, we are really going to be floundering. I mean, we will not. We are a huge economy, so we won't disappear. But the question is, when others are spending, and when other people are spending on research, on getting the company started, and we don't spend and we don't generate that demand, we will fall back. The COVID globally, and between countries, between regions, between businesses, between people, I think is going to change the world order, and therefore we need to be spending competitively and smartly.
Right. So, as for IBC suspension, I mean, I was not able to locate the notification. So, I think it is only the announcement yet. If you can throw some light on that
I
also.
think it is, I mean, I don't follow all the notification, but it was announced. And then I think, I mean, it's happened in stages. But I think the last one basically said that any new COVID related cases will not be
Yeah.
coming in.
Yeah, but notification is still not there, because yesterday there was some article in the Bloomberg, and that is what I have written to the authors. Where is the notification? I think till the notification comes, the things.
Correct, correct.
Right. Uh, so, sir, I'll thank you for your time and for the enriching session. And I'm sorry for the initial glitch that we had for some time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having us. And, sir, if with your permission, I would just like to give a quick tour of our website.
Sure, please.
I'll just share my screen. So like this is ebclearning.com, and here we are trying to bridge the gap between the law school learning and what we do in the practice. And we got interviews with the stalwarts like Ram Jethmalani sir, probably his last interview was with us. We had with Anar Madhva Menon sir, with Tulsi, KTS Tulsi, and many more. And I'll just quickly take you through our website to the various courses that we have developed. We have developed courses on ADR, like your arbitration. We have got two courses. We have got courses on mediation. Then we have got courses on competition law, Consumer Protection Act, like 2019, the latest one we look at. We have got courses on contract law, which helps you drafting. Criminal law, we teach criminology. And we have got 7 courses, a complete path on the insolvency and bankruptcy code. And apart from that, there are various other courses on your check bounce, name change, privacy policy, psychology, sports law, and taxation. So we are trying to just produce as many courses as possible and to bridge the gap, make the knowledge more accessible. And that is the purpose of this webinar also, to share the knowledge. Right, and you can visit our social media channels on the YouTube as well as on the Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn also. So thank you all, thank you sir, and it was great having you here. And thank you everyone. Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. I'm ending.